Greetings, everyone, Muslim, non-Muslim, ex-Muslim, and everyone in between. This is Readings in Asbaab Nuzool. We're on number 7, and we'll be talking about Abu Lahab, one of my favorite subjects. I lately have really enjoyed getting to know a lot of the Prophet's adversaries, his enemies, arch rivals, whatever you want to call them. There's always this interesting drama in the Hadith literature that we discover and read about. And so I decided, well, let me choose Abu Lahab for number 7, so we can take a look at the Asbaab works just to see a little bit of that rivalry at play. So I want to, as usual, just have this short agenda. I want to talk about just Abu Lahab and Jamil, just very briefly, nothing too much in depth. This is easy information you can Google. And then we're going to look at a chapter that's dedicated to Abu Lahab. And when I say dedicated, not in the way you think, probably in the worst way you possibly imagined. And then we'll talk about the sabab, or even in this case, there's one reason why, but we can look at the various hadith and talk about that sabab, that cause for what prompted the writing of this chapter. And then we could talk about some benefits, some fawaid from the asbab, and just some things that came to my mind as I was reading them. So who is Abu Lahab and Jamil? And there's a good, if you're going to Google this, go to Wiki Islam. The ex-Muslims of North America organization have put together Wiki Islam. I think I was just looking at they revamped it, and they did some really good work on it. And if you type in, when you go to Wiki Islam, Abu Lahab, it gives you a lot of information there. So I'm just going to be reading from there, from Wiki Islam, because there's a lot of information in Arabic that's really detailed. I just don't really have a lot of time to go into the Sirah works and read from those. So just really quick, for those who don't know who Abu Lahab is, he's the half-paternal uncle of the Prophet. He was a leader of the Quraysh. He was a staunch critic of Islam, no doubt. And it says here he was one of the few Arabs alive during Muhammad's period of revelations to be mentioned by name in the Quran. And if you go to the Wiki Islam site, they give you a lot of good information about him and his background. And they even give some good references here from the Sirah works as well. Abu Lahab was more of a laqab, a nickname. He was given that by his father, from what I understand from some of the works that I've read in Arabic. And he was called that because he had a very, like a reddish complexion. I guess his freckles were really, really reddish, and he had probably like a really light complexion. So he was given that nickname of Abu Lahab. So it's not a derogatory name, like we find the Prophet giving, for example, Abu Jahl. That's not Abu Jahl's laqab. That's not really his. That's what the Prophet gave him. He was known as Abu al-Hakam by the Quraysh. And for example, like Musaylima al-Kadhab, his name wasn't Musaylima, his name was Maslama. The Prophet was known to do this. He would give people these bad nicknames. So he's known as here. Oh, they actually give his full name was Abdul Uzza ibn Abdul Muttalib, and his kunya given here, it looks like it's Abu. Oh no, it's Abu Lahab here. But I know his children. I think he was known as Abu Utayba as a kunya, right? So the kunya would be the name of your firstborn child. Like me, I'm Abu Imran, my firstborn son. But the laqab that he had was Abu Lahab, right? And I didn't find anything on Jamil on Wiki Islam. Well, there is some information on her, but not as in details I found on Wikipedia. So Jamil, that was a laqab I think that was given to her as well. She was known as Arwa bint Harb. And it says here that she was an aunt-in-law of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, who is mentioned in the Quran. She was Abu Lahab's wife and Abu Sufyan's sister. Arwa is usually remembered for opposing Islam and the Prophet, and also for a poem, which we're going to look at in a moment. So just briefly, that is who Abu Lahab is, and that who his wife Jamil is. And the chapter that was revealed about Abu Lahab is known as Surah al-Masad. And Masad would be like a palm fiber type substance. And the surah goes like this. After the Bismillah, it starts with Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. Perish the hands of Abu Lahab, and he'll perish. Ma aghna anhu maluhu wa ma kasab. His wealth and what he has earned will not help him. Sayasla naran dhat al-lahab. He will enter a burning fire. Amratuhu hammalat al-hatab. As will his wife, the carrier of firewood. Fi jidiha hablum min masad. Around her neck will be a rope of palm fiber. So as we can see instantly, this is a without a doubt a poem, and you can kind of look at it as a parody or satire against Abu Lahab, right? And what I remember, Abu Lahab is the only enemy of the Prophet who is mentioned by name in the Quran, and I think the only other person mentioned by name in the Quran by way of the Prophet's companions was Zayd, his adopted son. So those are the only two mentioned by name. Everybody else is not mentioned by name in the Quran, although a lot of the Asbaab Nuzool works will mention, like for example, there are many verses about Salman al-Farisi, there are many verses about Umar ibn al-Khattab, about many of the Battle of Uhud and Badr, about the companions of those times and their martyrdom. And I probably will consider maybe just highlighting a few instances where there are verses that are specifically dedicated to companions of the Prophet. I'll probably do that in one of the upcoming Asbaab Hadith from my top 10. But that in a nutshell, it's a very short chapter, 5 verses. And as you can see, it is not a very friendly one. And it makes you wonder about the God of the Prophet Muhammad and how he would respond to a human being. But let's take a look first to get some more context of what all of this means. Why did this come about? Why would God write or reveal satire or parody about someone that he himself created and knew would disobey him? So we have 3 hadith. I'm not really going to go into detail with all of them. There is some of the scholars of hadith have given different times and places where this may have happened. But for the most part, the main story about why Surah al-Masad was revealed was based on some of these hadith that come from al-Wahidi's Asbaab. So I'm just going to read one in Arabic, because the other ones, they have different wording and some different variants, but not too different. But this one here, it says, صعد الرسول الله ذات يوم صفا. It says that on one day that the Messenger of Allah, he climbed the hill of As-Safa. فقال, and so he said, Ya Sabaha. Ya Sabaha is kind of like a phrase of warning. It's kind of equivalent to yelling fire in an elevator or a theater, right? It's a serious word. You don't just blurt it out. فاجتمعت إليه قريش فقالوا له ملك. So the Quraysh, they all came together and they said, what's going on? What's up with you? فقال, so the Prophet, he says to the Quraysh after they've all gathered, أرأيتم لو أخبرتكم أن العدو مصبحكم أو مماسيكم أما كنتم تصدقوني. He said, what would be your opinion if I were to tell you that there was an enemy that was entering upon us in the morning, or that was, going to attack us in the morning, or going to attack us during the evening? Would you believe me? قالوا, so the Quraysh, they said to him, Bala, of course. So then the Prophet, he says, قال فإني نذير لكم بين يدي عذاب الشديد. He says, so indeed I am a warner to all of you about a terrible punishment, meaning the hellfire, warning them about hell. So Abu Lahab, he hears this and he says, فقال أبو لهب تبا لك لهذا دعوتنا جميعا. So Abu Lahab says this word tabban lak. He says, they've translated, some people have translated the hadith, say it means may you perish, right? Because we just looked at the hadith, the Surah al-Masad, how they've translated it. he says to the Prophet, may you perish. You gathered us all just to tell us this? فأنزل الله عز وجل تبت يد أبي لهب وتب. And then so Allah reveals this surah, تبت يد أبي لهب وتب, all the way to the end of the verse. There are two other narrations with different wording, and this one here, I'm not going to go over it. It's just there for reference. You can see he calls the tribes by name individually. So he says, Ya Ali, Ya ala Ghalib, Ya ala Lu'ayla, Ya ala Murra, Ya ala Kilab, Ya ala Qusay. I'm just calling all of them Kilab. I'm sorry, I said it with the qaf. Ya Ali ala Kilab, Ya ala Qusay, Ya ali Abdul Manaf. And so he calls all of them and he says, the same thing. And then the other hadith, I'm not going to go into that either. It's almost pretty much the same. But the last hadith that Al-Wahidi gives us, he tells us why the Prophet gathers them all together. And it's because he has a verse that's revealed to him, وَأَنْدِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, which means, so warn your people, the nearest of your kinfolk. And so the Prophet takes this to mean that he's supposed to go and warn all of his people, Muslim or non-Muslim, from among the Quraysh, and call them and warn them about the hellfire. And so this prompts, this angers Abu Lahab, and this is what prompts him to say, Tabban lak. And then the response to this, Tabbat yada Abi Lahabin wa tab. So that's the reasons for it. And give me just a minute here, because I want to talk a little bit more about this phrase. So this phrase of Abu Lahab is a little bit steeped in controversy. Tabban lak. And it reminds me of something that happened. I have some notes here just to provide some context. There was something that happened among the Salafis some years back that this immediately reminded me of while I was reading. And it happened with this Salafi da'iyah by the name of Abu Tawbah. Abu Tawbah, African-American from the East Coast. He studied in Mauritania for many years. I met him in '98 before he went off to Mauritania at a QSS conference many years ago. Quran and Sunnah Society of North America used to be based in the United States. It was a Salafi organization. It was headed by Dr. Muhammad al-Jibali. And when they transferred over to Canada, they went to Toronto, there wasn't an American branch that was left. It went all the way stayed in Canada. So at any rate, I met Abu Tawbah there at the '98 QSS conference. They used to have these annual conferences. And he was real nice guy. And later on, he would become pretty well known. He wasn't well known at the time that I met him. At any rate, long story short, he would give these classes after he came back from Mauritania. Abu Tawbah's classes used to be pretty packed. I had a colleague who was from New York who used to tell me there used to be just a lot of people there. And even today, he draws a lot of crowds. Anyway, he gave us tafsir class on Surah Lahab, on Surah al-Masad, about Abu Lahab. And he said that when Abu Lahab said, Tabban lak, it was equivalent to telling the Prophet, fuck you. Right? And so Allah's response to Abu Lahab, Tabbat yada Abi Lahabin wa tab, was like Allah saying, no, fuck you. Right? So Dawood Adib, one of the other Salafis, got onto that really quick, and they made a big stink out of that. So Abu Tawbah would be considered like a conservative Salafi, and Dawood Adib would be from among the tabloid Salafis. If anybody's seen my video, an introduction to critical Salafi discourse analysis, I talk about the various types of Salafis. You can go back to that. Towards the end of the video, I talk about the different Salafi groups. So you can see what I mean by the difference between a tabloid Salafi and a conservative Salafi. So I'm going to play just a smidget. I had found this, and I thought, let me just bring this to the viewers' attention, because it's really interesting to associate some links, because I'm going to talk about this from a linguistic and pragmatic aspect. We're going to listen to what Dawood has to say about Abu Tawbah. I thought it was hilarious to share. But this is what he's talking about. He's talking about Abu Tawbah and what he did, what he said about this. And it's called, somebody linked it, it's from a lecture series, The Crime of Hizbiyya Against the Salafi Da'wah. And here, this video on YouTube, it's refutation of Abu Tawbah by Dawood Adib. It's not really a refutation, it's just like, he's just saying, he's just kind of basically bashing Abu Tawbah. A refutation would have some detailed, a polemic would have some detailed substance to it. This is nothing close to that, at least in my opinion. So let's listen to what Dawood says about Abu Tawbah and the Tabban Lak controversy.
When he was doing the tafsir of Surah Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin wa Tab, and now they've deleted it, but we still have it. We still have the recording. Where when he gave the explanation of Surah Tawbah, that he called the linguistic explanation, he said that the meaning, to make us understand what is meant by Allah's statement, Tabba, he said it's like Abu Lahab was saying to the Prophet, F you. So Allah said, F you to him. That's what Abu Tawbah, that comes once a month to Khalid ibn Walid, said about Allah. And you flock to him and you embellish Salafiyya. You embellish that masjid, crowd and standing room only. This man said, Allah, he says, and I'm not trying to be vulgar, but he said it. Allah, it's like Allah said to him, F you. But no. What's the problem? I've made this almost.
All right, so you can see a pretty serious, situation going on here. I just want to segue into this area of talking about Tabban Lak, Abu Lahab's statement, and then the Prophet responding in the, I guess, what can we say, in the essence of Allah, I guess, or speaking as Allah's mouthpiece. Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. So I kind of agree with Dawood here from the aspect of pragmatics. Remember we talked about pragmatics in earlier hadith that I talked about. It's the way we use language and the way we exchange phrases like assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. Right? These are repetitive things that we do. And so from a translation aspect, it's true. I wouldn't say tabban lak means fuck you. And that tabbat yada abi lahabin, that means well fuck you, back, like it's a stronger response. I wouldn't say it means that. There's not an equivalent in English to the F word that we use in Arabic. I mean, I can't even think of in colloquial Arabic that I use of anything equivalent other than I've heard like some Arabs say, ruh idnak, like go back up into your own ass, or, like literally, it would literally mean, fuck yourself, like in the sense of sticking yourself into your anus, in that sense, or if you're a woman in your vagina. It definitely doesn't have the same effect as if you said to someone, kus ummak, which those are some fighting words, right? It just means your mother's pussy. You want to piss off an Arab. Kus ummak is probably the thing to say to really, I mean, I wouldn't advise it, but again, so in that sense, I agree with Dawood. It doesn't mean fuck you and fuck you back. That's not what's going on here. And the scholars of language have said, tabban is in this sense, because it's mansuban, tabban lak. It's like saying khasara lak, khasara, meaning may you lose whatever you have of wealth and children and money. It's just like, may you be just desolate with nothing. It's like loss. But on the other hand, I do agree with Abu Tawbah. It is serious in the sense that it's not a pleasant phrase to use, right? You don't just, if you don't believe me, just go up to an Arab, and just say, ya Arab, tabban lak, and you tell me if he responds, oh, mashallah, you're probably going to get cussed out. You're going to have some reciprocation going on here. So from the sense of pragmatics, it's not a friendly statement. And I think that's why for me, I reached the conclusion early on when I was reading these works of tafsir that how, a God using this phrase is just petty and beyond a divine being, especially a divine being that created Abu Lahab. Like he knows the essence of Abu Lahab. Why would he respond back with this, this same type of response in a pragmatic way? It's a tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab is a very human reaction to an offensive phrase. Okay, and so that's the way I'm just going to leave it. That's the way I'm just going to say it doesn't make sense from that aspect. But that's just something I just wanted to throw in there just to show you some of the Salafi drama that goes on. So we move along to, excuse me, got a little allergies. We move along to something unique that's usually not talked about by the Muslims. And it is Jamil's response to the Prophet. Okay, and so there's another hadith. If you look in the tafsir, I have here the tafsir of al-Qurtubi. I found it online. It says here that when Surah al-Masad came down and it reached Jamil, because remember there's a phrase, this phrase, وَامْرَتُهُ حَمَّلَةَ الْحَطَبِ, it doesn't mention her by name, it just mentions her as his wife, as if she's insignificant. That reaches her, and it says here, just for time, I'm not gonna read the Arabic, but I'm reading the Arabic now, looking at it. It says that when his wife, meaning Jamil, heard what was revealed regarding her husband and herself in the Quran, she went to the Messenger of Allah while he was sitting in the masjid near the Kaaba, and he was with Abu Bakr. And she had some stones. She was going to pelt him with them. She's going to knock him out with them, I guess. And she stopped at Abu Bakr. And then it says here, then Allah took her sight, is what it says. أَخَذَ اللَّهُ بَصْرَهَا. Meaning that, I guess it would say that Allah made the Prophet invisible to her, I guess is what we could metaphorically look at it that way if we wanted to translate that. And then she asked, where is Muhammad? She's looking for him. She's going to deal with him because she heard he wrote some poetry about him. And then she leaves. And Abu Bakr looks at the Prophet and says, didn't she see you? Like, you're right here with me. And then Abu Bakr says to, the Prophet says to him that Allah hid me from her sight, right? Now, it also says here in another part of the narration that when she hears it, she responds with a poem of her own. And that's the poem that you see right here. So I have side by side, I have Surah al-Masad, and then on this side I have her response. And so in my opinion, I'm just going to do just a really quick comparative analysis. There's so much you can get into here from the aspect of language and poetry. But let's look at first at her response. So she says, مُذَمَّمًا أَصَيْنَا وَأَمْرُهُ أَبَيْنَا وَدِينُهُ قَلَيْنَا. So she says, the troublemaker we disobey, his words we reject, and his religion we detest. And that's pretty witty on her side. If you really think about it, the Arabic is just, there's so much going on here that you could probably write a little booklet on it. But let's look at just, in comparison, why I think Surah al-Masad is a very human construction. One, when we compare it to Jamil's poetry, we have a number of things that I've noted here I want to talk about. Form-wise, it takes the Prophet 5 verses to Jamil's 3 verse response, right? And some people say, oh, well, he had to talk about Abu Lahab and Jamil. Okay, fair. But even then, if this was from Allah, and Allah knew that Jamil would respond with some witty, good poetry, he would have given something even shorter. And that's because shortness, brevity is important here. And this is one of the elements that I think speaks to the greatness of her response. And the Prophet himself, he's known, he said in the Hadith, خَيْرُ كَلَامَ مَا قَلَّ وَدَلَّ. The best of speech is that which is short and to the point. And no doubt, when you compare both of these, she's shorter and to the point than the Prophet is with his lampooning of Abu Lahab and Jamil. Syllable-wise, Surah al-Masad has, and it's 5 verses. Verse 1 is 11 syllables. Verse 2 is 10 syllables. Verse 3 is 9 syllables. Verse 4 is 12 syllables. And verse 5 is 9 syllables. So the syllables are off. Jamil's impressively are all 7 syllables each. Right, her first verse, 7 syllables. Second, 7 syllables. Third, 7 syllables. And then the rhyme schemas in Surah al-Masad is just, it's a little off because he uses watab, kasab, lahab, khatab, masad. So it's ba, 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 and then we get a dal. So it's a little off, right? Still beautiful, but it's off. But Jamil's, the rhyme is perfect. Asayna, abayna, qalayna, right? And what she's doing here, she's using anaphora with we disobey, we reject, we detest. So it's this she does this repetition in this very beautiful way. And the first line is brilliant. Mudammaman asayna, right? So mudammam, let's talk about that word here. Mudammam has many different meanings. And in this case, it means troublemaker or a sinner or somebody who creates chaos in a balanced and stable society. And mudamman is a play on the name Muhammad. So the Quraysh used to call him many different things, and mudamman was one thing they would call him. So she's repeating a nickname that they would call the Prophet, mudamman, instead of Muhammad. So she's using an antonym as well in the very beginning, and it's mansuban. In regular speech, she would have said, Asayna mudammaman. But mudammaman comes first because it's a tawkid, it's emphasis, and it's to make mockery of the name Muhammad. So Muhammad would be praiseworthy, mudamman would be something that's blameworthy. So she's using the antonym to strike back, using just words. And then Asayna, we disobey him, meaning we don't follow what he tells us to do. Wa amruhu abayna, meaning the amruhu here meaning the awamir and the nawahi, the commands and the prohibitions in Islam. They say we reject those. And then dinuhu qalayna, we detest his religion. Why? Because what we see here is the insight into how the Quraysh viewed. They believed in Allah, and they believed in Allah in their own way. They didn't want to believe in Allah the way the Prophet wanted them to believe. And so they were content with their faith in Allah and the way they worshipped Allah. And they didn't want his deen. They're perfectly fine with their deen. So that's a very interesting part that I wanted to share here. A few talk about her response, and few talk about this comparative analysis between the two. Again, it's subjective. There's definitely going to be Muslims who will disagree with me. There'll be those, even linguistically, will say, no, not this and that, but this is my opinion, and this is just what I'm sharing so that you can kind of see my thought process of when I'm looking at these things. And also because, again, like I said, as I'm getting more and more into the rivalries that the Prophet had with his so-called adversaries and enemies, I like to read between the lines and just kind of get an understanding of why they rejected and why Islam wasn't convincing to them. And this is an instances where we see that happening here. We see why, they were content with their way of life. They didn't want anything to change. One final note here. I had been going through some of my books and I came across this book here, Sharh Ad-Durus Al-Muhimma Li'ammati Al-Ummah. It's by Sheikh bin Baz, and he has a tafsir where he goes over Surah al-Masad. I was looking through it. I'm just going to put that back. And in there he says that in that part of Surah that Saysla Naran that al-Lahab, and then the verses afterward, he's saying that that's a prophecy that became true, right? He means that the Surah al-Masad is a prophetic surah. And he says that the chapter prophesizes the demise of Abu Jahl by stating that he'll be in the hellfire. And this immediately, as I started to go through this and as I went through the Asbaab works, I saw this is incorrect. And the response to that, this allegation, is that the chapter doesn't prove the existence of a hellfire. Nobody has died and gone to hellfire and come back and brought us pictures or images of what hellfire looks like. The hellfire is a subjective story. For some, it's a fairy tale. We tell people to keep them in line. And there's no way you could prove a hellfire exists at all. So there's nothing prophetic about that. And then secondly, it doesn't give a detailed description of how Abu Lahab would die in order to be considered a prophecy. Right? It just says, he's just going to enter the hellfire. Now I could see if it told us how in detail Abu Lahab was going to die and that happened, okay, you have a case. It is so vague, you can't really consider it a prophecy. So this is something else I wanted to share. Some of the Salafi interpretations about prophecy, and they also will talk a lot about, Salafis talk a lot about the nubuwah, the dala'il al-nubuwah, based on some of the ulama's works. about proof of Muhammad's prophecies, of his being a prophet. And this is a weak one. I'm sorry. There's just not enough detail. Okay. So to end, just some fawaid, benefits from the Asbaab in regards to this hadith, to the Asbaab hadith and the surah itself. First one, the idea that a divine being would fashion a satirical poem against one of his created beings is absurd and shows a deity that is overly sensitive and unable to control his, her, or its emotions. When comparing Jamil's response poem to the Prophet, Surah al-Masad is proof that the Quran was written by the Prophet. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful surah, and I used to love reciting it, and I still find some value in it in the sense of literature, world literature. But to believe that it's a divinely inspired, divinely written, it's a huge claim. Third, we get a glimpse into the minds of Abu Lahab and Jamil, who believed in a different Allah than that of the Prophet and had a different belief system that did not agree with the Prophet. And then lastly, we have evidence of a chapter constructed based on an incident, like the Sabab. And this is in conflict with the notion of free will, as well as the Quran being uncreated. As the Salafi say, Al-Quran huwa kalamullah wa huwa ghayru makhluq. The Quran is the speech of Allah and is uncreated. Abu Lahab had his deeds and belief written before he was even allowed to execute them, making the deity of Islam responsible for allowing it instead of divinely guiding Abu Lahab. And these cannot be Abu Lahab's actual deeds and beliefs if the Quran always existed and was not created when revealed. So that is number 7. In our next readings in Asbaab Nuzool from the works of Al-Wahidi, I'll be talking about the top 10 most interesting hadith, and we'll deal with number 6. And until then, stay gold.